In 1911, the 29-year-old Douglas Mawson led the Australasian Antarctic Expedition to conduct scientific research in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Mawson and his team set up base at Cape Denison and launched a series of exploratory missions to map the unknown regions of Antarctica. One of these missions was the Far Eastern Sledging Journey. It was December 1912, and accompanied by two men, Xavier Mertz and Belgrave Ninnis, Mawson set out on a trek across the desolate ice. They were facing temperatures that plunged below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The mission was meant to be a 6-week journey to gather scientific data and explore new territories. But just 2 weeks into the journey, Ninnis, along with the 6 strongest sled dogs and the sled carrying most of their essential supplies, including the majority of their food, tent, and critical equipment, plummeted into a hidden crevasse concealed by a thin layer of snow. Mawson and Mertz could only watch in helpless shock as their friend and vital resources vanished into the abyss. Desperate, they crawled to the edge of the crevasse, shouting Ninnis's name into the icy darkness below. The only response was the eerie echo of their own voices and the distant sounds of collapsing ice. Risking their own lives, they attempted to peer deeper, but it was evident that no rescue was possible. Mawson and Mertz were left with barely enough rations to survive. With more than 300 miles separating them from their base camp at Cape Denison and only a scant supply of food remaining, mostly consisting of meager rations and what little could be salvaged from their remaining sled, the odds were stacked heavily against them. The loss of their tent meant no shelter from the brutal elements, and the reduced number of sled dogs threatened their ability to traverse swiftly enough to outrun starvation and exposure. And instead of turning back, Mawson decided they would press on to complete their mission and make it back to base alive. As the days turned into weeks, starvation, exhaustion, and the relentless cold began to take their toll. To stave off starvation, they were forced to cull and consume their remaining sled dog. This desperate measure came at an emotional and physical cost, as the dog's livers contained toxic levels of vitamin A, leading to severe health complications. By early January, Mertz's condition had deteriorated alarmingly. He suffered from intense abdominal pain, severe weight loss, and extreme fatigue. Hypervitaminosis A began to manifest, including hair loss, skin peeling, and a deterioration of mental faculties. Mawson did everything within his power to care for his ailing companion. Unfortunately, on January 7, 1913, Mertz passed away in Mawson's arms. Mawson was left alone and his body began to break down. His skin peeled away, his feet were ravaged by frostbite, and his hair fell out in clumps. He was starving and haunted by hallucinations, yet somehow he kept moving forward as he still had over 100 miles of terrain still to cover. Mawson harnessed himself to the sled that once required the strength of multiple dogs to pull and began the journey. Without any landmarks or variation in scenery, time seemed to stretch infinitely, and the concept of progress became almost abstract. To maintain his grip on reality, Mawson established a strict routine. He would measure his distance carefully, record observations in his journal, and recite poetry and calculations aloud to keep his mind engaged. On January 17th, as Mawson trudged forward, the ground beneath him suddenly gave way, and he plummeted into a hidden crevasse, much like the one that had claimed Ninnis weeks before. The fall was abrupt and violent, but the rope attaching him to his sled caught on the edges of the crevasse. This left him dangling above the abyss. After what felt like an eternity, Mawson finally emerged from the crevasse. He reinforced his sled harness, adjusted his path to avoid further hidden dangers, and continued his march towards Cape Denison. The journey remained excruciatingly difficult. Blizzards frequently halted his progress, forcing him to dig shallow snow shelters to wait out the storms with minimal protection. He had reduced his meals to small scraps and occasional bits of lichen scraped from exposed rocks. Throughout this ordeal, Mawson's focus was on reaching the safety of the base camp and delivering the valuable scientific data they had collected. And after nearly a month of solitary struggle, on February 8, 1913, Mawson finally caught sight of the cliffs near Cape Denison. The base camp was still miles away, but just knowing he was close gave him the strength to push through the final leg of his journey. When Mawson finally stumbled into the base camp, he met with a mixture of shock, relief, and awe by the small team that had remained at the base. The men could hardly believe that Mawson, who had been presumed lost along with Mertz and Ninnis, had made it back alive. In recognition of his extraordinary achievements, Mawson was knighted in 1914, becoming Sir Douglas Mawson. Today, Douglas Mawson is remembered as one of the greatest polar explorers of all time.